February 14th, 2019. Los Angeles, the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. The Legends of Sound Gala, one of the most prestigious events of Grammy Week, was bringing together the most elite names in the music industry. Men in tuxedos, women in designer gowns, all sipping champagne and smiling at one another. Ticket prices started at $10,000 per person, and the guest list read like a living encyclopedia of music history. But not a single one of the 300 people in that room knew that in exactly 17 minutes they would witness the most unexpected performance in the history of this venue. And the person who would trigger that performance wasn't the evening's guest of honor. It was the man sitting at the corner table, sipping his champagne with a condescending smirk on his lips. Victor Ashworth was the senior music critic for Rolling Stone magazine. 53 years old, grey hair slicked back, glasses perched on the tip of his nose. In his 30-year career, he had torn apart hundreds of albums and ended dozens of careers with a single article. He saw himself as the arbiter of music, a supreme judge who decided what was art and what was noise. He was especially ruthless when it came to heavy metal. To him, the genre was nothing but a cacophony where talentless people hid behind amplifiers. And the greatest symbol of this view was sitting at the table directly across from him, Ozzy Osbourne. Victor was known for the dozens of negative reviews he had written throughout Ozzy's career. The Prince of Darkness? More like the Prince of Talentlessness, he had once written. But what he had planned for tonight would be far more devastating than all those written attacks. Sharon was beside Ozzy Osbourne, as always, his guardian angel. Ozzy had never liked these kinds of events. The stage felt natural to him. Singing in front of tens of thousands of people was as easy as drinking water. But these society parties, these artificial smiles, these hollow compliments, they suffocated him. As the night progressed, various artists took the stage and delivered brief performances. A country legend sang an acoustic piece. A young R&B star delivered an impressive vocal showcase at the piano. After each performance, Victor Ashworth would whisper mocking comments to his colleagues beside him. Finally, the evening's host stepped up to the microphone and announced a special segment. As a new tradition introduced this year, a selected artist from among the guests would deliver the surprise performance of the evening. Curious whispers rose throughout the room. Who would be chosen? What song would they sing? The host smiled and added, this year's selection had been left to the esteemed critic Victor Ashworth. Victor rose slowly from his chair. The expression on his face carried the confidence of a chess player about to deliver checkmate. When he took the microphone, his voice echoed throughout the hall. Distinguished guests, he said, tonight I want to test true musical talent. Without studio tricks, without backing tracks, just pure voice and ability. He paused, his eyes drifting toward Ozzy's table. And for this, I'm going to make the most interesting choice of the evening. Mr. Osbourne, I invite you to the stage. The room froze for a moment. Then whispers rose, chairs creaked, necks turned. Everyone was looking at Ozzy's table. Sharon's face tensed immediately. She touched her husband's arm and whispered, "This is a trap. Let's not go." But Ozzy was already rising to his feet. There was a strange expression on his face. Neither anger nor fear, just a calm determination. He squeezed his wife's hand and smiled. Don't worry, love. I know what this man has planned. But sometimes the best answer isn't silence. It's music. Sharon wanted to protest, but Ozzy had already moved away from the table, walking toward the stage with slow but resolute steps. The room had fallen completely silent. 300 people held their breath, watching the aging rock legend's every step. Victor was waiting at the edge of the stage. As Ozzy approached, the smirk on his lips became even more pronounced. Mr. Osbourne, he said into the microphone, throughout your career we've always heard the same claims. The voice of rock and roll, the godfather of metal music, the Prince of Darkness. But tonight, I want to see your true musical talent. Without the noise and smoke, without the amplifiers and pyrotechnics. Ozzy listened in silence. His hands trembled slightly, but his face managed to remain calm. Victor continued, his voice now openly mocking. "I've chosen a song for you. If you're truly a talented vocalist, you should be able to sing this song. But if your entire career has been nothing but noise and stage theatrics, well, then we'll all see the truth." He signaled to the musician at the piano. When the man began touching the keys, Ozzy recognized the song immediately. Sam Cooke's legendary piece, "A Change Is Gonna Come," one of the anthems of the civil rights movement, one of the most powerful examples of soul music. This song required technically demanding vocal transitions, deep emotional expression, and perfect breath control. Completely unfamiliar waters for a heavy metal singer. Victor's plan was clear: to humiliate Ozzy in a genre he didn't know, with a song he had never sung. Many in the room shifted uncomfortably. This was blatant humiliation, right in front of 300 people. Some expected Ozzy to back down. Some expected Sharon to intervene. But no one knew that Ozzy Osbourne had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Ozzy took the microphone in his hand. For a moment, he listened to the piano introduction in silence. Then he closed his eyes and did something no one expected. He began to sing. But this was no ordinary performance. When the first notes left his mouth, the air in the room changed. His voice trembled, yes, but this wasn't a tremor from Parkinson's. This was an emotional tremor loaded with over 50 years of life, of struggles, of victories and losses. "I was born by the river," he began to sing, his Birmingham accent adding an unexpected depth to Sam Cooke's original interpretation. "In a little tent, and just like the river, I've been running ever since." The voice rising with the piano accompaniment reached every corner of the hall. The crystal chandeliers seemed to quiver slightly. Champagne glasses sat forgotten on tables. The smirk on Victor Ashworth's face slowly began to fade. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ozzy shouldn't be able to sing this song. He should fall short, stumble, become a laughingstock. But what was happening was the exact opposite. The rock legend was recreating the soul classic. He was pouring his own story, his own pain, his own triumphs into these notes and words. He was telling the story of a boy from the poor neighborhoods of Birmingham climbing to the top of the world. The years when people mocked him and called him crazy, the rehabilitation centers, the friends he had lost, Sharon's battle with cancer. He was fitting all of it into this 3-minute song. And no one yet knew that what Ozzy would do at the end of the song would change Victor Ashworth's life forever. When he reached the bridge of the song, Ozzy opened his eyes. But he wasn't looking at the room. His gaze was fixed on a distant point, perhaps on years long past. "It's been a long time coming," he sang, his voice now close to a whisper, but every word sharp as a knife. "But I know a change is gonna come." These lyrics weren't just words to him. In 1968, at 19 years old, working in a factory in Birmingham's Aston district, he had heard this song for the first time. It was coming from the radio, and young John Osborne had put down the piece of metal in his hands and listened. In that moment, he understood that music wasn't just entertainment. It could be salvation. His mother had fallen ill that year. His father was working 14 hours a day, and young Ozzy would murmur this song every night before bed. Change is gonna come. One day everything will get better. Tonight, 50 years later, singing the same song in front of 300 strangers, that young factory worker was still standing somewhere inside him. At the back of the room, an elderly man sitting at his table was wiping away tears. Robert Chen, 82 years old, was a former blues guitarist. He had shared stages with Sam Cooke in the 60s. He was perhaps the only person in the room who knew how this song was meant to be sung, and what he was witnessing right now was shaking him to his core. A rock star, a metal icon, was capturing the spirit of Sam Cooke. Ozzy wasn't seeking technical perfection. He wasn't copying the notes exactly. Instead, he was telling his own story. Robert leaned over to his wife beside him and whispered, "This man isn't fake. There's truth in every note." His wife nodded. She was crying too. In fact, looking around, half the room was crying. Tuxedos, evening gowns, expensive watches and jewelry. All of it had become meaningless. All that remained was a man and his song. Victor Ashworth's hands were trembling. His plan had shattered to pieces. Ozzy was supposed to look foolish. The room was supposed to laugh. But the opposite had happened. For the first time in his 30-year career as a critic, Victor felt defenseless in the face of a performance. A voice inside him, a voice he tried to suppress, was whispering, "You were wrong. You've always been wrong." He tried to silence that voice but couldn't, because Ozzy's voice, at that very moment, had reached the most powerful part of the song. "There've been times that I thought I couldn't last for long," Ozzy cried out. "But now I think I'm able to carry on." These lyrics were cutting something deep inside Victor, because there was a story he had never told anyone, a story he kept hidden in the darkness. And Ozzy Osbourne, without even realizing it, was pouring salt into that wound. When the song ended, the room fell completely silent for a moment. Time seemed to have stopped. Even the crystal chandeliers appeared to be holding their breath. Then, from the very back of the room, applause began. Robert Chen had risen to his feet. Then, like a domino effect, the entire room sprang up. The applause wasn't like cheering. It was respect. 300 people, tears streaming down their faces, were paying tribute to a 70-year-old man. Ozzy slowly lowered the microphone, his eyes still moist, a tired but peaceful expression on his face. Sharon stood at her table, her lips trembling as she smiled. In 40 years, she had watched countless performances by her husband. But this was different. This wasn't a stage show. This was a man laying his soul bare for all to see. But no one yet knew that the real turning point of the evening was still to come. Instead of leaving the stage, Ozzy approached the microphone once more. The applause gradually died down, and everyone began listening with curiosity. "Thank you," Ozzy said, his voice hoarse but clear. "But I didn't sing this song for myself." Curious whispers rose throughout the room. Ozzy continued, "I sang this song for a hand that reached out to me in the darkest moment of my life. In 1979, when Sabbath fired me, I locked myself in a hotel room in Los Angeles. For 3 months, I didn't leave that room. Every day I drank, every day I lost myself. The men I had grown up with for 10 years, people I considered my brothers, had thrown me out the door. I had nothing left. No money, no family, no future, nothing." The room had turned to ice. No one dared to breathe. Ozzy's eyes fixed on a distant point. "One night, there was a knock on my door. I didn't want to answer, but the knocking continued. Finally, I opened it, and standing before me was the person who would change my life." Ozzy paused, as if reliving that moment. She was an elderly hotel housekeeper, a small, frail black woman. She looked at my room, looked at me, and walked in without saying a word. She opened my curtains. She opened the window. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me. "You're Ozzy Osbourne, aren't you?" she said. "My son listens to your songs. Black Sabbath, Iron Man." I just nodded. "Well," she said, "what is the man who sang those songs doing in this room? You've been rotting in here for 3 months. You don't deserve this, son." Ozzy's voice trembled. Then she pulled a small radio from her pocket, an old thing that ran on batteries. She pressed a button, and this song started playing. "Sam Cooke, A Change Is Gonna Come." "This song," she said, "I listened to it when I lost my husband. I listened to it while raising 3 children on my own. I listened to it every night when I thought everything was over. And I'm still here. You will be too." Victor Ashworth sat frozen in place. His face had turned the color of ash, because the story Ozzy was telling was touching something deep inside him too. 1987. New York. His first year at Rolling Stone magazine. A young guitarist had released his debut album. Victor had torn that album to shreds. He hadn't just targeted the music. he had targeted the man himself. "A talentless provincial," he had written, "who dares to soil the doors of the music industry." That singer never released another album. He sold his guitar. He quit music entirely. Years later, Victor learned that the man was driving a forklift in a warehouse in Ohio. A dream, a career, destroyed by a single article. No one had blamed Victor. That was what criticism was. But Victor knew. Something inside him had hardened after that day. And to protect that hardness, he had chosen to become even more ruthless. He had defended himself by attacking. He had suppressed his guilt by criticizing. Ozzy began walking toward Sharon's table, but halfway there, he stopped. His eyes caught Victor, sitting at the corner table with his head bowed. He thought for a moment. Then, as everyone watched in astonishment, he walked toward Victor's table. Sharon wanted to stand up in concern, but the expression on Ozzy's face stopped her. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was an understanding that only someone who had seen the depths of life could carry. Ozzy stopped in front of Victor's table. The critic raised his head, his eyes red. The two men looked at each other for a moment. Then Ozzy did something no one expected. He leaned down and placed his hand on Victor's shoulder. "I've been in that dark room too, mate," he said quietly, so only Victor could hear. "Everyone has a pit they fall into. What matters is not staying there. And sometimes you need a hand to climb out." Victor's lips trembled. He couldn't find words to say. The walls he had built over 30 years had crumbled with a single sentence. Ozzy smiled, with that familiar crooked grin of his. "And by the way," he said, raising his voice slightly, "next time you want to test me, at least pick a Sabbath song. Iron Man or something. This soul stuff is hard, man." The room fell silent in surprise for a moment. Then laughter rose. The tension had dissipated with Ozzy's humor. But Victor wasn't laughing. He stood up. And that night, at the most prestigious event of Grammy Week, the music industry's most ruthless critic shook the hand of the man he had criticized the most. "I'm sorry," Victor said, his voice breaking. "For everyone. For everything." Ozzy simply nodded. "We can't change the past, mate. But we can change tomorrow. That's what that woman told me. One more day. Then one more day. Then one more day." 6 months later, an unexpected article was published in Rolling Stone magazine. The headline read, "The Man I Was Wrong About, Ozzy Osbourne and the Night That Changed Me." It was signed by Victor Ashworth. In the article, Victor recounted what happened that night and the regrets behind his 30-year career as a critic. But what mattered most was the final paragraph. "That night, Ozzy Osbourne taught me something. True power isn't in tearing others down, it's in lifting up those who have fallen. The Prince of Darkness was actually someone who carried the light. I had been too blind to see it." Victor retired from criticism after the article was published. He now mentors young musicians in Los Angeles. He found that guitarist whose career he had destroyed and apologized to him face to face. Ozzy Osbourne never gave an interview about that night. In a ballroom of 300 people, surrounded by expensive tuxedos and designer gowns, a 70-year-old man had sung a soul song, and that song had melted the iceberg in a critic's heart and changed a life. Music isn't divided into genres. There is good music and bad music. And every song that comes from the heart, no matter what genre it belongs to, is real music. Sometimes the most unexpected singers sing the deepest songs, and sometimes a song that says change is gonna come actually brings that change.